Welcome to Crime 411. A few months ago, I watched a documentary series on Netflix called I Am a Killer. There was a particular case that really stood out to me, and I wasn't alone in that. Thousands of people have since written to all kinds of politicians, congressmen, and people of power within the judicial system because what they saw was not only someone who took the lives of two innocent people, but someone whose life was also stolen from him. His name is David Barnett, and this is his story. A lifetime of sexual abuse. He molested all three of the boys. Stabbed them both to death. I believe he snapped. There was so much the jury never got to hear. No, I don't think he should spend the rest of his life in prison. And this is why. What do you want people to know about David?
I am no different than anyone else. I learned as a child, even from my brothers, I was willing to give up everything so I didn't get hurt. And I'm still that man. I want to, if I could, I want to let baby David die. That's what I refer to him as. I wish he would just die off and all the pain would go away. But it doesn't. I can't get rid. He's a part of who I am. This is me grown. I'm no different than anyone else. I'm just me. That's it.
Most children grow up hearing stories about how their mother would hold them and watch them all night while they slept because they couldn't believe how much they loved their baby or how beautiful their little baby was or how lucky they were that God had given them this amazing, beautiful little miracle to love and cherish for the rest of their life. David, on the other hand, grew up hearing stories about how his mother Shirley didn't want him and tried to abort him with drugs and alcohol when she was pregnant. And when he was born on May 18th of 76, she wouldn't hold him or feed him. She didn't want anything to do with him. And she referred to him as the bastard. She handed David over to a well-known prostitute who was also on drugs and suicidal named Mary. These are the stories that David grew up hearing about the love his mother felt for him. This is the woman who carried you in her body for 9 months and felt your little feet kick for the first time. You're the only one who knows what that woman's heartbeat sounds like from the inside. And she doesn't want you, and she doesn't love you. And unfortunately, that is just where David's story starts. For the first 5 years of David's life, he was really passed around like furniture. Shirley believed that a man named Robert was David's father. And so for the first 5 years of his life, he was in Robert's care. Now, Robert was also a career criminal and an alcoholic, so not someone who should have been raising a child by any means. He had beaten David when he was little. What he does remember is his father, Robert, leaving him in the care of different women who were staying at the house, and those women touching David inappropriately. David was taking a bath, and one of the women attacked him with a butter knife and broke his nose. And David remembers looking up from the water and just seeing blood everywhere. He was removed from the home by Department of Family Services. Robert went to a supervised visitation at DFS, and when the worker left the room, he kidnapped David. For weeks, David was forced to sleep in the trunk of Robert's car alone during thunderstorms without being fed, without being bathed, comforted, or cared for. He went into the foster system and he was staying with a lady named Rita and her children and her husband, and they gave him his own room. This was the first time that David had anything of his own. He had his own room. It has to be such a bittersweet and yet confusing situation to be 5 years old and you have known nothing but chaos and abuse and what it's like to go without. And you walk into a situation and you're put into a family where these people are having dinner together at night and spending time with each other and comforting one another. There was a storm one night, a thunderstorm, and as you can imagine, after being left in the trunk of a car through thunderstorms, he was terrified. And Rita came in the room and she held him and she rocked him. It breaks my heart to think about that. She held him and she rocked him until he fell asleep in her arms. He said it was the first time in his life that anyone had ever shown him that kind of love or compassion or any sort of maternal instinct at all. That's heartbreaking. Just when he felt like he fit in, Rita had a job offer overseas. David wanted to go, but Robert would not sign over his parental rights, and he hadn't lost his rights yet. So David couldn't go. He had to stay in the foster care system. And so being a little tiny boy who had been passed around his whole life, he naturally thought they didn't want him anymore, that he had done something wrong. You go for the whole first 5.5 years of your life not knowing what it's like to have anybody care about you. And then you get it and you know how that feels, and it must feel amazing in that moment. And then it's ripped away from you again. When David was 7, he met John Barnett, who was another foster parent. He was a single man with no children, and he decided he wanted to adopt David. After a year of grooming David, he asked David, "Do you want me to adopt you?" And of course, finally, David, after a year of going and having his own bedroom, the largest bedroom he knew, making some friends in the neighborhood, going and doing fun things, of course he wanted to be adopted. Up until now, his life had been a complete and living hell. So he said, yes, of course, I want to be adopted. And so John Barnett became David's adoptive father. And that was when everything changed. Before David was adopted, the Department of Family Services caseworker that was assigned told her supervisor that she had major hesitations about John Barnett adopting David. The supervisor disregarded her suggestion and adopted David out to John Barnett anyway. This happened right before she transitioned to a position in a different state. So she had literally no say over what happened, but there were red flags before David was adopted, and they were ignored. The plot thickens from here as John Barnett continued to adopt young boys, only 8-year-old boys. Yet nobody saw any reason to be concerned with that pattern. He also at one point was a volunteer for Big Brothers Big Sisters of America and was told that his voluntary services were no longer needed, although they could not clarify further for legal reasons. However, anybody who is familiar with Big Brothers Big Sisters will tell you there is always a need for male mentors within that program. They tend to have more female volunteers than men, and so the need is strong. So for them to tell him that his services were no longer needed as a volunteer tells me that there were red flags waving furiously all over the place. John Barnett was also asked to resign from his position as a high school math teacher and then became a school bus driver. Again, red flags everywhere. John Barnett started touching David more and more inappropriately as time went on. He would have David sit on his lap and he would lick inside David's ear and kiss him inappropriately on his neck. And from there, things only got worse. David recalls John playing with David's genitals while he sat on his lap, telling him, if you love me, you'll let me do it, being told all the while how bad David was, that nobody would ever believe him if he told them. That typical pedophilia, sexual predator manipulation tactics that are used on little kids. David remembers John making him come into John's bedroom in the middle of the night, and John would be naked and rubbing himself up against David's body, trying to stick his fingers in David's anus. This is when David started to have blackouts due to dissociation. So some of the symptoms of dissociation include memory loss. And that's the body's way of coping with trauma that is too severe for you to be able to handle. Depersonalization is, feeling disconnected from your own body, almost like you're having like an out-of-body experience. Or identity confusion. You might not even have a sense of who you are. So these are all signs of dissociation, and David was suffering with those from the time that he was a very young boy. John had this quote-unquote game that he would play with you and your brothers and one of your brother's friends. What did that game entail? And I say game, obviously I know it wasn't a game.
John would love to have you sit on his lap, no matter, regardless of who it was, as long as it seemed to be a young boy. And the game that he would play was who could basically lock lips the longest with him. Every now and then it would seem like he tried to make it more than a kiss. There were things going on with his body that made you uncomfortable. The way he touched you, and which you later learned was groping.
He was aroused.
Right. He became sexually aroused. I don't know.
Being a young boy, did you recognize at that time this isn't a game? Like this, there's something wrong here.
I knew right away that the way I was touched made me uncomfortable, and I didn't necessarily know it was unnatural, and I didn't even really know it was wrong. I just knew there wasn't something. It wasn't correct. As a child, you can't form the words. As an adult, of course, the emotion that I felt then was, this is absolutely wrong. A child should never experience that. It's sad moments. There are moments where I am completely defenseless, and I had to basically succumb to his wicked desires, because there was nothing I could do. If I denied him that pleasure, or said I didn't want to, or complained, it'd be a slap, a smack, or a spanking.
There was something in your book that I read about a time where he wanted to rub your butt in line at a fast food chain, and you didn't want him to.
Actually, it's a very clear memory, because we were at Wendy's, and every now and depending upon whether I played his games in the last few days, or I was a good boy according to him, I got a chocolate Frosty that Wendy's is famous for. And as we were standing in line, he reached down, and there was other customers, so it made me really feel uncomfortable, because I noticed that someone saw. He reached down and grabbed my butt, and he started to rub on it. And I know right then there's another girl standing next to next to her parents, and they just kind of looked like, and I knew right away, this isn't right. I'm only 8 or 9 years old, and I'm like, this is not what a parent does to their child. And I swatted his hand with mine, and he grabbed a hold of me and basically squeezed and said, stay right here. And then I tried to move again. He reached under me and squeezed so hard that I actually soiled my pants. So I went into the bathroom, and I changed everything, got as clean as I could, and left my soiled underwear in the bathroom. I think at that time I was so numb I couldn't feel anything.